for joining with us. I am Kavita Sukran, Corporate Communications Officer at the Ministry of Finance and the moderator for this press conference. Today, the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance, will be discussing COVID-19 relief measures. We will be taking questions from the media later on. Without further ado, I will now pass you over to the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. What I'd like to do today, or this afternoon, is just give a brief summary of the social protection measures that the government implemented in 2020 and into 2021 to deal with the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I have some data here, which would be accurate, I would say, as of the end of last month, coming into the first week of this month. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services has reported that they provided just over 25,000 grants to existing beneficiaries of food support, and that cost $17.1 million. In addition, that Ministry, Social Development, gave another series of grants as a food and income support to individuals who were retrenched or had their incomes reduced. And that was a total of 51,493 grants at a cost of $221.3 million. Additionally, 20,497 grants were distributed as food support to households that previously had received meals from the school feeding program. That was at a cost of $31.3 million. Further, the Ministry of Social Development provided 42,451 grants to current beneficiaries of public assistance and disability assistance. That cost $22.5 million. A further 3,000 grants were paid to people who were either on the disability assistance program or persons who had just applied for their senior citizens pension but had not yet received a pension. Those two items combined, those two grants, actually 3,300, totaled $14 million. A further 1,400 emergency hampers were provided to families in urgent need during the last stay-at-home period. Additionally, 25,000 food vouchers and market boxes were provided to families during the last stay-at-home period. This included a basket of fresh produce, chickens, and a grocery voucher. 4,322 grants were provided as rental assistance to families where a member was retrenched or had income reduced. That cost $22 million together with the food vouchers and market boxes. Those two together cost $29 million. A further $30 million, a little over $30 million, was provided to almost 200 religious bodies in three tranches of $10 million each for these religious bodies, churches, and other religious bodies such as mosques, etc., and religious organizations to provide food support by way of food hampers to needy people. That benefited, I am told, at least 50,000 people. In terms of salary relief, the Ministry of Finance, because we had two different types of income support in 2020. One was for persons who are within the national insurance system, who are registered within the formal system, and that is the salary relief grant. And then we had the income support grants given to people who are outside of the formal system and not registered for national insurance. So in addition to all of this that I just mentioned, which is a total of $354 million, the Ministry of Finance also gave out 85,447 grant payments these grants would have been of the order of $1,500. The other grants I spoke to are all of different amounts. And that cost $140 million. There are still some applicants who are outstanding. The records we have, there are approximately 7,000 persons who are still eligible for the salary relief grant, but who did not have valid bank accounts. So they are going to be paid by way of debit cards. The Ministry of Works and Transport also assisted maxi taxi and taxi operators by providing grants to maxi taxi drivers of $2,000, a one-off fuel grant to assist with the purchase of fuel, and to taxi drivers, regular route taxi drivers, of $750. The split was weighted far more to maxi taxi operators than taxi operators. I will speak about that in a little while, and hopefully this time we can adjust the process so that perhaps more taxi drivers will take advantage of this facility, because not many taxi drivers did, but quite a few maxi taxi drivers did. In terms of relief to artists, the Ministry of Tourism and Culture has reported that so far almost 1,000 cultural relief grants, each of $5,000, have been provided to artists and creatives. That is based on a fund established at the National Carnival Commission. In terms of business support, tax refunds, accelerated tax refunds, were paid to over 25,000 individuals last year, clearing off all outstanding individual tax refunds at the time at a cost of $250 million. In terms of VAT refunds to smaller businesses, 5,011 VAT refunds were paid out at a cost of $460 million. And then we issued fully transferable, tradable, encashable VAT bonds at a total value of $3 billion. The total amount of tax refunds in 2020 and to date, $3.7 billion. In terms of assistance to the business community, small and medium enterprises, we established a guarantee loan facility with the commercial banks, 4 of them. And loans were provided based on the size of the business and for general operational expenses like payroll and so on. That loan has not been fully utilized for various reasons, which I'll talk about in a little while, and there still is quite a significant balance there. We had provided a facility totaling $300 million, and we still have a little over $200 million available. NIDCO has reported for the very small entrepreneurs, the micro entrepreneurs, that they have provided almost 1,800 grants. These are grants where it's not a loan program, to owners of micro businesses. The Exim Bank has reported that 52 importers access a total of US $75 million for 3 months to bring in food, pharmaceutical, sanitary products, and other essential supplies through the special import forex window. This has been renewed by Cabinet for a further US $75 million. Now, we are not, as a government or a country, able to do all of this again. When you add up all of this, it is close to $5 billion, and not all of the assistance that the government has given is in this list. This is just a list I brought for this press conference in order to provide general information. What I can tell you is that we in the Ministry of Finance have agreed to find the necessary resources to give income support and salary relief grants for the month of May, so that in light of the restrictions that have come into force in the month of May, starting from the beginning of the month, we will provide an income support grant if people are not in the formal system, and a salary relief grant if people are in the formal system, of the same amount as last year, $1,500, for persons who may have lost their employment for just a week or two towards the end of May as a result of the restrictions just introduced a couple of days ago. We'll provide a grant of $1,000. So for persons who lost employment at the beginning of May because of the restrictions put in at that time on the hospitality industry in particular, we will provide a grant of $1,500, and for persons who may have lost their employment just in the last couple of days, we'll provide a grant of $1,000, and that is just for the month of May. We anticipate that at least 20,000 people will be eligible, and therefore we're looking at a cost somewhere between $25 and $30 million for that. The Ministry of Agriculture also today began the implementation of quite an innovative program. Some of you may have seen something circulating on TikTok. For those of you who watch social media, I think there's advertisement on TikTok. And the way it goes is dasheen, cassava, plantain, squash, pineapple, citrus, pawpaw, cucumber, boli, peppers, tomato, and some chicken. So today, the Ministry of Agriculture, I'm advised by the Minister of Agriculture that today the Ministry of Agriculture started the rollout of a program. Just let me get the details here. The Ministry of Agriculture is committed to, in this month, maybe going into the first week in June, to provide 25,000 food baskets with all of the things I just mentioned there. In addition to all of the vegetables, would be 2 locally processed chickens. I'm told that today the program began to roll out in 18 of the 41 constituencies, and 2,000 families began to receive these food baskets today. But the target is to produce and deliver 25,000 food baskets in all 41 constituencies in Trinidad and Tobago. So that would be somewhere in the vicinity of 600 food baskets per constituency. Let me come back now to the small and medium enterprise loan. These loans that we designed were interest-free with a moratorium of 2 years, so that for the first 2 years, the small and medium businesses who access these loans would not have to make any payments at all. And then they would only have to pay back principal because the government undertook to pay interest. However, there are certain minimum requirements to get a loan, such as up-to-date financials, tax clearance, VAT clearance, income tax clearance, national insurance clearance, and regrettably, the vast majority of applicants were unable to satisfy these requirements. And the banks even relaxed their procedures to allow for the submission of management accounts. In other words, did not ask for audited financials, and even then. And it tells us something about the state of small businesses in today, and we all have to work together. The government and small businesses have to work together to get their house in order. It is unacceptable that businesses are operating without financials. But unfortunately, that was the experience. We in finance are going to work with the banks, since we still have a positive balance for loans to small and medium enterprises of, I'm told the figure is actually $229 million. We're going to work with the banks and see what adjustments we can make to the program to make it easier for small businesses to access these loans, and perhaps widen the scope of the things that the money can be spent on, because we limited it to operational expenses last year, payroll, rent, and so on. And we'll see whether there are other expenses that businesses may have, like the purchase of equipment and so on, that are all very reasonable. So we will be working with the banks to make it easier for small businesses to access this facility. Because there's no point in having $229 million in a bank account, which is for the purpose of guarantee, and people are not accessing the loans. I'm told by the credit unions that it's a similar situation where the members are simply not accessing the loans. So I will be speaking to the credit unions as well to see what we can do to relax the conditions. With respect to the grant program that NEDCO is operating, we in finance will work with NEDCO to see how we can accelerate the distribution of these grants, because we gave them an initial allocation of 35 million, and so far I'm told they used up about 16 million. The grants are up to $20,000 for small businesses who can satisfy the criteria. And we are going to work with NEDCO, top up the fund, make more money available to NEDCO, and see how we can encourage micro entrepreneurs to access these grants. Because again, it doesn't make sense to have this facility available and people are not accessing it. So basically, if I can recap, what the government is doing and will be doing, funded through the Ministry of Finance, is providing income support and salary support for the month of May for persons directly affected by the public health regulations. We'll also be working with the Ministry of Agriculture. I had a discussion with the Minister of Agriculture just a few minutes ago, and we will fund their food basket program for the next 3 months and probably down to the end of September, so that they can see whether they can organize themselves, because I'm not a farmer, but I'm told that farmers need to plan, and therefore produce isn't just lying around. But once the farmers are aware that we have this program, I'm told the Minister of Agriculture will work with the farmers to produce these 25,000 food baskets every month, and we're going to finance them in the first instance for the next 3 months, May, June, July, and also August and September once it works out. We would also have to supplement the food baskets with some food cards, but again, we have to be very careful, because we found in the past that people are only too willing to try and beat the system and also access relief that they're not really entitled to. We really want to help those who are most in need. So we are going to put some controls in place to make sure this assistance goes to everyone who needs it, as far as possible and as far as what is affordable. I would now be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Minister. Before we proceed with questions, we kindly ask all media representatives to identify yourself before posing your question. I will now proceed to take your question. Good day, reporter.
Good day, Minister. Panel, Brian Hamilton, David Trinidad, Newsday. I have 3 quick questions. I don't know if you want to take all 3 at once. Just
a second. We don't have video for them. Reporters hiding from it. Mr. Davis, do you have video?
Yeah, I don't have video right now.
Okay, Mr. Davis. We will proceed on this occasion, but on the next occasion, this is a virtual video conference. So go ahead. All right. Yes, Mr. Davis. Go ahead. Shoot.
One of the first questions I want to ask will there be any preparations for relief given to legal migrants as far as this system is concerned, and how would the process be? Whatever relief grants or whatnot would it be the same for locals? The second question is actually coming from one of our readers. She called and she claimed that she hadn't received her tax refund for 2019 and wanted to know if there was an issue. Just tagging onto that, should there be a concern as far as income tax returns and so on, especially at this point in time? And the third question is as far as the TTMF is concerned. I mean, I know it's a 2-week period for this lockdown. Well, not lockdown, for this restricted point in time. But we wanted to know if there were any measures being put in place for TTMF to defer loan mortgages and so on.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. And in fact, there's another point I need to make. I have been working with the Minister of Social Development and Family Services, Senator Donna Cox, and we have both agreed to make our best effort to have the applications for income support and salary support completely online. So we will be creating an online application form that can be filled out online, such as if you apply for a visa, for example, there's a form where you put everything in electronically and you sign it electronically and you attach various documents at various stages of the application process. Because with the current COVID infection rate and the problem that we're having with our health sector, we would not want any physical applications to be made. So we are targeting Monday at the outside and hopefully by Friday to have this fully online application system, both at the Ministry of Social Development and at the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Social Development for income support and Ministry of Finance for salary support. Ministry of Finance is for persons who are in NIS, and Ministry of Social Development is people who are not in NIS. So those are the dates we are working towards. Monday for the latest, Friday hopefully a fully online application system. With respect to persons who are not permanent residents or nationals, we would expect, as occurred last year, that they would be facilitated through the religious bodies. That's what happened last year. At this point in time, the relief for salary grants and income support grants would be restricted to residents and nationals at this point in time. Nothing is ever cast in stone, but we know that when we gave the food support to the churches last year, that 30 million, they used that with their network of economic migrants and so on to provide them with basic food support, which is what we want to do at this time. We want to make sure people have the ability to get food. So that answers question number one. Question number two, tax refunds. We will be working with Inland Revenue to see what we can do to clear off outstanding tax refunds and also to issue some additional VAT refunds, because we recognize that cash flow is the lifeblood of any business, and VAT refunds and tax refunds really do help to keep companies in funds and give them the ability to keep workers on payroll and keep people employed. So in terms of persons who somehow got dropped out of the system or whose application was deferred, we will do a complete examination of what is in the system and see what we can do to clear off those refunds as soon as possible. That's question two. And with respect to question three, I will have discussions with the banks and the mortgage companies and see what can be done at this point in time. I would not want to make a firm commitment yet. Maybe by next week I could give a further update on that.
Good day, report,
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Minister. Stephen Cummings, 98.1 FM.
Thank you for using your video.
You're welcome. Just a few questions, three actually. I'm hoping to pose all of them at the same time, if
Go
that's
ahead.
okay with you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you again, Minister. The first question is, do you see the need, Minister, for a pullback on some large capital expenditure and greater focus on social sector transfers and subsidies in the current scenario adjusting to the pandemic? Also, are there any further considerations for a drawdown on the HSF at this time? And my final question in the three, any further support for local creatives and entertainment that would have lost over a year of productive capacity? I know that there was a $5,000 given through the National Carnival or Commission. Are there considerations for further assistance in that regard? Thank you.
Okay, if I can take those in reverse order, I will discuss the question of extending the cultural relief grants with the rest of the cabinet. That would have to be a cabinet decision. So far, as I told you, almost 1,000 grants were given, but yes, I understand that's a sector that has been affected So we will see what we can do with respect to that issue. What we want to do and what we were planning to do before the latest round of restrictions were announced a couple of days ago were to to assist people who were particularly affected by the restrictions, the previous restrictions, so that we understand that there are categories of persons who are more affected than others. So we'll see what we could do there. With respect to the Heritage and Civilization Fund, we do have the lawful ability to withdraw from that fund during this year, and we will do so within reason and very responsibly as required to make sure that we can meet our monthly commitments, not just for COVID, but for all of our monthly commitments in terms of provision of goods and services and payment of salaries and wages and so on. And could you all remind me of the first question?
Yes,
Oh, yes. Sorry. That was an excellent question. There is a view, if you do reading, you look at what is happening in Europe in particular, there's a recommendation that government should move away from large infrastructure projects and move towards smaller projects that have a greater impact in terms of employment and in terms of impact on the community, and I am an advocate of that. I've been doing quite a lot of reading in the last couple of months, and I do think we have to start shifting the focus away from huge projects to smaller projects that benefit more people and are more community-based. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, Minister. Joel Julian from Guardian Media. You mentioned that with the salary relief grants and the income support grants, there were persons who were trying to beat the system.
Yes.
Can you, tell us what sort of measures have been taken by the Ministry of Finance to deal with those who may have tried to undermine the system? And also a second question with respect to the vaccines. At this point in time, no vaccines are coming. Has the government decided to put aside any funds for the purchase of vaccines if those are to become available directly from manufacturers? Will we be putting funds in like an escrow account, or have we as yet determined any amount that we like to put aside at this point in time?
Sure. The type of fraud that took place before is people double-dipped. So a person would apply to the Ministry of Finance for a salary relief grant. Somebody who is in the national insurance system, they would get it. Then you go over to the Ministry of Social Development and swear on a statutory declaration that they are not in the NIS system and they have not received a grant. We found several thousand people like that. So this time, the process may take a little longer because we're going to make sure that there is complete interconnection between the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry of Finance to make sure people can't double dip. With respect to that other question, the government has done what is required to access more than sufficient funding for vaccines. We have a World Bank facility available to us, which has at least 8 million US available for the purchase of vaccines. And we just got approval from the government of China for a loan facility to help us with general expenses. But contained inside of there is a significant amount of money for the purchase of vaccines from China. So we have more than enough resources available, but with those two loan facilities, the World Bank facility, which would pay for vaccines coming from the COVAX alliance or directly from manufacturers like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, etc. And we have a loan facility with the government of China already approved. Took quite a while to negotiate, a long time, but we settled it. And in there, we can pay for any quantity of Sinopharm vaccines that we require. So we have enough money available immediately to pay for any vaccines. The problem with vaccines is availability. We're very, very fortunate that the Sinopharm vaccine has received WHO approval, and I might stress I'm not a doctor, but I used to be a Minister of Health, and I happen to know that the terminology approved for emergency use simply means the vaccine has been approved for use in an emergency, and the pandemic is an emergency. So if you look at the approval given for Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, they are all approved for emergency use. And the reason they use that terminology is that normally a vaccine would take years to develop and go through all its trials and so on. But if you have a global emergency, as we have now, then they accelerate the approval process and they approve the vaccine for use during an emergency. So the Sinopharm vaccine has exactly the same level and quality of approval as Pfizer, as AstraZeneca, as Johnson & Johnson, and therefore now that that approval has been granted to Sinopharm, we will access as many vaccines as we possibly can get practically and realistically from Sinopharm to try and ensure that we get herd immunity and we can vaccinate as many people as possible.
Yes. Hi, good day, reporter.
We should go to another one. Yeah.
Hi, Stephen, you had another question?
Yes, thank you again.
Was there nobody else that wanted to come in? Okay.
Yes, Minister, just another question I have while we are waiting on the other
Sure.
to come in. This question, I know we are treating specifically with COVID-19 relief measures, but I'm hoping to engage you on this question and hopefully you can respond. Our mid-year budget review is coming and broader fiscal in October. Any general predictions on what our position will or could be on the side of reducing our external and domestic debt profile, knowing again, and I'm tying this back to the amount of money that we have to expend in terms of our general overall relief effort.
And I wouldn't want to preempt the mid-year review. This press conference is about COVID-19 relief. You will have ample opportunity to get information when the mid-year review is presented, which won't be too long from now.
Minister, we do have a question from Anthony Wilson via our inbox chat. So he's asking, Anthony Wilson from Express is asking, has the government given consideration to accessing the International Monetary Fund's lending facility called the Rapid Financing Instrument? The Rapid Financing Instrument allows countries impacted by COVID-19 to access low interest loans as low as 1.05%. His calculations is that TNT's quota of 242 million allows the country to access about 330 US million.
Well, Mr. Wilson,
Give us some background information.
Mr. Wilson, who is not on screen, just heard me tell the gentleman that this is a press conference about COVID-19 relief. So I'll just simply say that I can deal with those matters when we do the mid-year review, but in a very quick response, because I don't want to change the subject of this press conference from what we are doing for people in this month of May, is that those IMF programs do not come on their own. In order to access the rapid financing facility, you have to give a statement of structural adjustment. We're not ready for that yet. We have no intention as a country of going to the IMF for funding with a program of structural adjustment at this point in time. We intend, as we have done for the last 5.5 years, to implement our own programs rather than having to be told what to do by the IMF. But I'd like to come off of that topic now and go back to questions related to COVID-19 for the month of May.
Senior reporter.
This is a very bad connection, you know. I think we would leave that person. Let that person send in by the chat or whatever it is.
Ryan, you had another question?
Yeah, a couple actually. Just tagging off of my colleague Joel's question concerning the loan facility coming out of China. Could you tell us what would be the value of this loan facility and how would that tie into the public debt? All right, and if I could just follow up with that one time, as far as this new round of relief. How does that set us back as a country, again, as far as our national deficits, public debt as well?
Sure. When I was asked to look at relief to support what the Prime Minister had announced a couple of weeks ago, at the beginning of the month, which was really the closure of bars and restaurants and so on, we were estimating that it would cost me around 35-40 million. With these new measures, I expect it to cost maybe double that. So you're looking maybe $70 to $80 million. We don't really have a choice because we must do what we think we can do. If it is that we have to borrow that $80 million, well, so be it. Because every other country in the world is doing that. The debt is going up, of course. Debt to GDP ratio is out of whack. The whole world is like that. But if you were to sit down as a country and say, I'm not going to borrow because I'm worried about my debt to GDP ratio, then you will be making a very bad decision that is not in the public interest. So if we have to borrow that 80 million, we will. With respect to the Chinese facility, this is something we've been negotiating for over a year. And it is simply budget support. You would have heard me say at the beginning of the budget cycle in October that the deficit for this year is a little over $8 billion. That's what it was estimated at that point in time. And the deficit is all financing, whether you take it out of the Heritage Fund or whether you borrow it. So the Chinese facility is just part of a portfolio of borrowing that we are engaged in. We borrow locally, we borrow internationally, and we use different strategies and different methods and so on. This is quite an attractive facility. It's the loan is at 2%. It's 170 million euros. That's a currency that they asked us to do it in. That's about $204 million US. And they have put a stipulation in that of the 204 million US, we must spend 15% on what they consider to be Chinese elements, which was later defined to be Chinese goods and services. So that, and they did indicate at the time that vaccines would qualify within Chinese elements. So we have about 25 million US dollars out of that 204 million US dollars that can be made available for Chinese elements, which would include some expenditure on vaccines. Not the whole amount, but certainly it can cover whatever the expenditure would be on the Sinopharm vaccines and have quite a bit left over. Okay.
We do have a question from Rishi Harinanan.
Sure.
He's unable to join the call.
Well, I saw him in the photo there. So anyhow, let me hear the question.
He said, Minister, you spoke about putting controls in place to ensure people who deserve help get it. What are these controls, given that many people said they did not receive help in a timely manner last time? What is being done, if anything, to ensure people get help in the shortest possible time? And he does have a second question. Did the government consider any assistance to bar owners?
Yes, sure. Let me just use this salary relief grant as an example of what we are dealing with. We paid out almost 86,000 grants in salary relief. We have 7,000 qualified applicants, so that's less than 10% of the people who applied who did not have valid bank accounts. They qualify for the grant, but we can't pay them because they don't have a bank account or their bank account is not functioning properly. So we're going to give them a preloaded debit card. And that's taken a little time to roll out, but they've started to roll it out. So that, I just want to put that in perspective, because if you give out 86,000 grants and there are 7,000 more that you want to give out to people who qualify, then that's over 90% of the applicants that got the grants. One of the things I find with this story is that you never hear about the people who got the grants. So the 86,000 are not going to tell you. The 7,000 are going to complain. But we're going to try our best to facilitate everybody who applies, who needs it. With respect to controls, I'm talking about people who are double dipping. I'm talking about people who are already in the system receiving public assistance, receiving disability assistance, receiving other forms of assistance from the state, who would go and apply and say that they are not. So we're going to do a lot of checking this time. Last year it was an emergency, so some people were able to slip through. This time we're going to be double checking and cross-referencing to ensure that persons who are not already in receipt of a food card, for example. There are quite a lot of people, over 20,000 people who have permanent food cards, $750 a month. We don't want somebody like that to come forward and get in front of the queue of somebody else who has not received any help from the state. So that is what I mean by checks and balances.
Good afternoon, Minister. Jules Brown, TV6 News.
Yes, Jules, I saw your photo there a little while ago. Yes. Good to see you, Jules. Right.
There was a point made by the Prime Minister last week as you talked about the issue of control. He did make mention of there was an issue last year concerning some employers in terms of persons who, let's say, had lost jobs, went to, let's say, the NIB, and then they were being told, as I recall the Prime Minister saying, the issue of whether they would actually be registered on the system and so on. So I was wondering, how is the government going to deal with that in terms of the employers, any employers who are errant in that regard? Secondly, as well, you did say if you have to borrow the money in terms of the present leave system, you would borrow. I'm wondering whether this would be borrowing from internationally, from the local banking sector. How would that work?
Okay, let me deal with the last question first. As I said, we have a World Bank facility available to us. There's 8 million there for vaccines, but there's 12 million for support for the health sector. That's a 20 million US facility, almost 150 million TT. That's specifically for the health sector. The loan from China, the 200 million US dollars, which is about 1.4 billion, we can spend 85% of that on budgetary support and on relief programs like this, and 25% on things like vaccines and so on. So we have sources of funding available. If we do need more, we will be going to the local market primarily. I think we've done enough foreign borrowing for the time being, and therefore we'll be looking to the local market, and we're not having any difficulty in raising funds on the local market. With respect to persons whose employers refused to confirm that they were employed or refused to sign the form, the difficulty we have is fraud. If somebody applies, but they cannot produce evidence from their employer that they lost their job, we can't process that application. What we would ask that person to do is to go directly to the Ministry of Social Development in person. Obviously, we'll have to wait until this 2-week lockdown is over and make an application directly, present themselves. Because the type of fraud that has been taking place is that persons would apply online, they don't physically show up to go through any kind of interview process. They say that their employer would not give them a letter. The employer is refusing to stamp and sign their form. But there's no way of knowing how accurate that story is, because it's easy to say that I was working in so-and-so place, but my employer will not stamp my form. We've had quite a few instances of people who are not deserving of the grant at all coming through that system and telling us, look, my employer wouldn't sign the form. I have also picked up that quite a few employers don't want to be in the system because they employ people, but they don't register them for national insurance, for example, which is an offense. That is an offense where there's a fine, which we're actually looking at to see whether we should do something about the fine, because the fine at this time is just $5,000 for not registering one of your employees for NIS, even though the person is working for you. So at the level of finance, we're looking at that. Is that an appropriate fine? But people don't want to confirm who is working for them and who is not working for them, because then they find themselves under the microscope from the National Insurance Board, from the Board of Inland Revenue, and so on. It's a problem we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And a lot of companies don't do financial statements just for that reason too. So they don't have to submit tax returns and so on. So one of the things COVID has revealed is the level of informality in our system, which we have to deal with. So everybody should pay their fair share. Okay?
We do have a question from Suwan. AZP News is asking how much money was spent so far on vaccine preparation as well as vaccine procurement. Also, is there a projected budgetary amount to be spent on vaccines?
I don't have that level of detail. I can't tell you how much money was spent on vaccine preparation. What I know is that we purchased vaccines from the COVAX facility, about 100,000 vaccines, which we got for a little under $5 per shot. So you can do the maths. Maybe $500,000 US for that. The Sinopharm vaccines that are coming, the first 100,000 is free. We got some vaccines from India free as well. But we do intend to order. I was talking to the Minister of Health just before I came to this press conference. In fact, I think the Ministry of Health has put in the order already. 1.5 million vaccines. And if whatever they cost within reason, we will find the money to pay for them. I can't tell you at this point in time what they will cost, because the cost of vaccines varies widely depending on which vaccine it is and whether it is coming through something like the COVAX facility. The COVAX facility vaccines are very reasonably priced, $4, $50, $5, that sort of thing. If you have to buy directly from Pfizer, those vaccines that were touted, knocked about in the public domain a couple of months ago, they were selling them at $23 for one. I've seen all sorts of ridiculous figures in the, I don't know what to call it, the fake social media, that the Sinopharm will cost $150. That's nonsense. The figure I got today, an indicative price, was $15 US for one. And I've asked my people to go and see if we can get that number down. So you can do the maths. Let's say $10 per vaccine, 1.5 million vaccines, $15 million US dollars. We will spend that money. We will find it and we will spend it.
Hi, good day, Diane.
Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. I am Diana Benskin, co-host and correspondent of WCYE 95.9 FM, New Jersey, Voice of the Diaspora. On behalf of the staff and management of WCYE 95.9, we thank you for this opportunity to be part of the media briefing today and look forward to our continued participation in future and other briefings as well, sir.
You have a question?
Welcome. We are concerned about the government, I like to use the word national pause, and it is happening simultaneously with the national pause and the dispersing of funds, and it's not getting to citizens in a timely manner. Is it possible you can make the application process for these funds a little less tedious? And are you looking at what about the humanitarian grant, where the persons who were stranded, needed help to get them back home and to feed themselves while they were abroad? I myself had to chip in to help house and clothe and feed and pay tickets for individuals to return home. How are you?
Hold on a second, please. Is that two questions you have there?
Yes, sir. I have one more if you don't.
Just ask me the third one, please. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much. And are you going to expand any grants or monies to help the Ministry of Health to handle the spike in the COVID cases here, sir?
Okay, so the three questions are, can we make the process of application easier? We most certainly will try to do so, especially since it's going to be a completely online process. We will try to make it as simple as possible. Obviously, simple things like identification and so on are mandatory. But we'll still try and make it as simple as possible. With respect to grants for persons who are stranded overseas, that is not something we are contemplating at this point in time. But now that you have raised it, I would certainly give consideration to it, but I can give no guarantee at this point in time, because we are focusing on people at this time who are in Trinidad and Tobago. But certainly that's something I would discuss with colleagues. But I can give no commitment on that at this point in time. With respect to the third question, what was the details of the third question? The last one.
Diane, can you repeat the third question?
I got a little tied up there with the last question. I thought I got the gist of it. Just repeat it for me, please.
No problem, Honorable Minister. If you could, is there going to be any additional?
Okay. I remember now. Yes. Yeah, the reason why I got a little tied up with the question is that I've said repeatedly, maybe this is the first time you have accessed the Ministry of Finance press conference, and I am being told it is. But I've said repeatedly, not only in press conferences, but in the budget statement and elsewhere, that whatever money is required for the Ministry of Health, we will find it. And this is why we have this $20 million loan from the World Bank, which will go directly towards the purchase of medical supplies, medical equipment, and vaccines. We have loan facilities from other international banks, international organizations such as the Andean Bank of Latin America, and so on. So we have procured and made arrangements to access any and all funding that the Ministry of Health requires, because if the Ministry of Health runs out of money, then it will be catastrophic. So you can be assured that whatever money is required to keep the hospitals running, to pay the doctors, to pay the nurses, to buy the supplies, to buy oxygen, to buy whatever is required to support the health sector, that is our number one priority in the Ministry of Finance, and we will make the funds available.
Minister, we do have a question from Radio Tambourine, who inboxed us.
Sure.
And they're asking, with regards to Tobago, there was a challenge of applications have to be sent to Tobago to Trinidad. Some in Tobago feel that they may have slowed down the process for Tobago applicants to receive their grants. What is your take on that, and how do you plan to address that?
Well, with the fully online facility, nothing will have to be sent anywhere. The person, whether they are in Scarborough or whether they're in Cedros, will apply online, and then we're going to pay directly into their bank account. Regrettably, there are going to be a few people, and we found that happened quite a lot in Tobago, where there were issues with some of the banks and so on, who will have to get debit cards. But the vast majority of persons, both in Trinidad and in Tobago, will be able to apply online and get a direct wire transfer going to their account. So that problem about applications being made in Tobago and having to come to Trinidad and go back, that should disappear.
We have a question from Curtis Williams. Unfortunately, he doesn't have video.
It's okay.
Hi, good day, Curtis. You with us?
Yes. Minister, can you tell us what has been the total cost of this total response, this COVID response to the country? I'm not just talking about how much government has spent, but I'm talking about in terms of lower revenue streams and so on. Have you been able to model what has been the total cost to the country?
No, I can't give you that information at this time. I would certainly make that information available when the media review is done, because we have a lot of information on shortfalls in revenue and additional expenditure and so on. So that information will be made available during the media review.
We do have another question from Stephen Cummings.
And could we now just kind of wrap up? Okay.
Hi, Stephen, you have another question?
Yes. Yes. Thank you again, Minister. I'll be very quick.
Sure.
Still on the issue of relief. I know that we've had a discussion about the VAT refunds, but I'm thinking whether there are considerations as well, Minister, for adjustments to the to taxes, in specific categories, because I've also been aware that there had been discussion about a review and probably an overhauling of our taxation system. I know that there's the Board of Inland Revenue. There's some changes, there. Are there considerations for relief where taxation is concerned in specific areas? Thank you.
Well, I've spoken about this on numerous occasions. I'll just repeat what I've said before. Any tax waiver or exemption the government gives, for every dollar that the government waives or gives up in terms of taxes, that's $1 less to provide for COVID-19 relief. Because money doesn't drop from the sky. The government's money is tax revenue. So if the government gives up tax revenue, 100 million of tax revenue, for example, then that's 100 million less to give people in terms of relief. So I am afraid we cannot relax any of the taxes at this point in time. We need, as a country, to collect as much revenue as we possibly can. We are already down significantly. I had a press conference a couple of months ago, and I reported that we were, for the first 4 months of the year, we were short almost $2 billion in terms of tax collections. So that's $2 billion we have to go and find it. We have to go and borrow that we didn't plan to borrow. So that it's unreasonable for people to ask for tax relief and then at the same time ask for COVID relief. And that is what is happening. That's the kind of requests we're getting. Allow us not to pay taxes, but give us financial assistance as well. I'd love to be able to do that. There are countries in the world that can do that. United States is like that. United States would simply go to Congress and say, I want to give out $2 trillion in COVID relief. And then they'll go to the US Mint and say, print $2 trillion US dollars. That's all they do. They don't have to worry about backing up that $2 trillion that they just printed in the US Mint. They just print it and send it out. And there's a reason for that. The United States dollar is what is called a reserve currency. And a reserve currency is a currency that everybody else wants. So 70% of all currencies held by all countries and banks in the world is in US dollars. So you have currency floating around in the world, 70% of it is greenbacks. And therefore, the US Mint can just print and print and print, and the demand is out there because they feel that the US will not collapse as a country. We in Trinidad and Tobago do not have a reserve currency like the euro or the pound. We cannot simply just print money. So unfortunately, we have to rely on tax collection to give the financial assistance to those most in need. Okay? That's it. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and thank you very much for the tenor and the nature and the pleasant approach to this press conference. I deeply appreciate the way all the journalists approached the task of asking questions, and I hope I was able to assist in some way to indicate what the government is planning to do in this month of May for COVID relief. Thank you very much.
And with that, we thank members of the media and viewing public for joining us.
And that was a virtual media conference hosted by the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, to discuss government's COVID-19 relief measures. Remember, you can keep up to date with the latest stories on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at TTT Live Online. I'm Mahalia Joseph Wharton. Have a good afternoon.